Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm actor and screenwriter Lec Zorn, and in this episode I'll be super deep analyzing the 1985 comedy drama classic Heaven Help Us. Well, back in January or February of 1985, when I was 14 years old and in 8th grade, my brother and I were at our dad's house for the weekend, and on Saturday night I was watching the music video show Night Tracks on WTBS. I was massively consumed by the pop and rock music of the day, and I could hardly wait to get MTV. At that time, both of my parents had cable, but neither of them had the expanded package that included MTV, so I had to settle for Night Tracks, which aired for 6 hours every Friday and Saturday night. During a commercial break on this night, I saw an ad for a movie that I'd never previously heard of, in which a character who I later came to recognize as Brother Constance orders a character who I later came to recognize as Rooney to eat a piece of paper. I thought that was so hilarious I instantly wanted to see the movie. And of course, as you've probably figured out by now, the movie is called Heaven Help Us. I missed it during its theatrical run, which turned out to be very short as the movie grossed a mere $6 million at the American box office, which even then was pretty low. Back at that time, I was residing in my hometown of Madison, Indiana, and we had two movie theaters, a two-screen indoor theater down on Main Street, and a drive-in on the outskirts of town. Heaven Help Us never played at either theater, and in fact, Madison residents often drove an hour to Louisville, Kentucky, to see Hollywood blockbuster movies that weren't likely to play in Madison in the near future, if ever. My parents, first together and then separately after their divorce, took my brother and me to see movies in Louisville probably 25 to 30 times during our youth, but unfortunately, Heaven Help Us was not one of them. Still, I didn't have to wait long to see it. By June, it was out on VHS just 4 months after it was released theatrically, which was pretty fast in those days. Now it's, of course, standard. I rented the movie from a local store that was just about a 5-minute walk away from my mom's and stepdad's house, and watched it for the first time at my brother's 13th birthday party, which was 30 years ago last month. The movie ended up being everything I hoped for and much more. While marketed strictly as a comedy, Heaven Help Us is actually a comedy drama, and very possibly the best movie I've ever seen in that genre. It's a hilarious yet powerful coming-of-age story that combines a wide variety of elements and makes them flow together seamlessly. The movie focuses on an old boys Catholic high school in Brooklyn known as St. Basil's during the 1965-66 school year. The opening credits make me feel immediately at home because they're set to the Hallelujah chorus of Handel's Messiah, which my mother often played on keyboards in local Christmas programs, and which is also performed by one of my favorite musical artists, Styx, on their 1973 album, The Serpent is Rising. Then we're taken to the opening scene, which, despite having no direct relation to the rest of the movie, does a great job establishing the movie's tone. During a mass at the school, when one of the church leaders clicks a device signaling the congregation to stand, a mischievous student with an identical device clicks it a few seconds later, signaling everyone to sit down. The cycle repeats itself several times, with the congregation standing up and sitting down at rapid pace until the culprit is caught and forcibly removed from the premises. Next, we're introduced to the main character, a high school senior named Michael Dunn, played by Andrew McCarthy, as he enrolls at St. Basil's. Dunn, who's usually referred to by his last name, and his approximately 10-year-old sister, known as Boo, have just relocated from Boston after the death of their parents, and have moved in with their grandparents. The movie doesn't reveal how Dunn's parents died. Dunn's introduction to St. Basil's is a one-on-one meeting with the headmaster, Brother Thadeus, played by Sutherland, the only actor in the film who was very well known at the time of its release. Brother Thadeus is quickly established as being extremely dry and equally strict. For example, when Dunn responds to Brother Thadeus by saying, "Yes, sir," Brother Thadeus corrects Dunn by saying, "Yes, Brother Thadeus." Several similar disputes take place throughout the scene. And furthermore, when Brother Thadeus asks Dunn to explain in his own words what he hopes to accomplish at St. Basil's, and Dunn responds, "To try and do my best," Brother Thadeus responds, "You must do more than try, you must succeed, Mr. Dunn." Brother Thadeus goes on to spoon-feed the line, "Yes, I will succeed, Brother Thadeus," which Dunn repeats verbatim, and only then is Brother Thadeus satisfied. It's interesting that Brother Thadeus asks to hear Dunn's own words and yet is only satisfied when Dunn repeats Brother Thaddeus's own words. That encounter between Dunn and Brother Thadeus does a great job establishing the stifling atmosphere and the discouragement. That encounter between Dunn and Brother Thadeus does a great job establishing the stifling atmosphere of tight control and the discouragement of individuality at the school. However, as the film progresses, we slowly get beyond the surface of Brother Thadeus and learn that he's fair and even compassionate. In fact, in a surprisingly convincing and beautiful moment, he joyfully cries upon seeing Pope Paul VI in person in a parade. Even as a non-Catholic, I'm moved by that moment. Dunn's home life isn't a lot less stifling than his school life. His grandmother is strongly opinionated and seems fairly controlling. She's determined that Dunn will become a priest and even fantasizes about him becoming Pope Michael I. However, Dunn apparently does not share his grandmother's dream, as evidenced by him having a girlfriend later in the movie, to his grandmother's disappointment. Dunn's grandfather is friendly and easygoing, but the grandmother seems to be the dominant one in the couple. Dunn, however, does seem to have a good relationship with his sister, and they have a few nice moments together. She's slightly mischievous, but is also quick-witted, and seems to be very mature, possibly from having to grow up so fast because of her parents' deaths. And by the way, it's never revealed whether Boo is her real name or a nickname, and in case you're wondering, Boo is actually spelled B-O-O. Now, Dunn is a character who I very strongly identify with, like very few characters I've ever seen. He's not particularly shy, but he is introverted as well as sensitive, introspective, and serious-minded, all traits that I had at a similar point in my life. In his first day of class, he observes some of the hardcore disciplinary tactics used at St. Basil's. When the teacher, Brother Constance, played by J. Patterson, asks the students to hand up their papers on the Holy Trinity, he catches a student named Ed Rooney, played by Kevin Dillon, talking and therefore instructs him to read his paper to the class. Rooney, who like Dunn is usually referred to by his last name, speaks nonsensically off the top of his head, clearly having no clue about the subject. Meanwhile, a fat intellectual kid with a high-pitched voice named Caesar, played by Malcolm Danare, wants to read his paper, so he raises his hand and tries several times to get Brother Constance's attention. Brother Constance finally gives Caesar permission to speak, but almost immediately notices that he's chewing gum and orders him to stick it on his nose and leave it there for the remainder of the day. Brother Constance then asks to see Rooney's paper and notices that it's blank. Rooney initially denies trying to deceive Brother Constance, who then smashes Rooney's head into the chalkboard 9 times until Rooney confesses and apologizes. Caesar then turns to Dunn and cheerfully says, "Welcome to St. Basil's." The two quickly become friends, and each seems to be the other's only friend. Naturally, Caesar is often ostracized because of his weight, and he tries to compensate for his lack of social status by portraying himself as an intellectual giant. He also speaks often of his aspiration to attend Harvard and become a psychiatrist. Like Dunn himself, the Dunn-Caesar friendship also resonates very strongly with me, as it reminds me very much of a friendship I had with a college classmate of mine who is almost a clone of Caesar in weight and personality. My friend even had a somewhat high-pitched voice, though not to the extent of Caesar's. Because of his friendship with Caesar, Dunn becomes a target of Rooney, who's the class bully. Rooney is very profane, somewhat dim-witted, has a brash, irreverent personality, and gets annoyed very easily. He's already in his second year in grade 12, while laying the groundwork for a third. He constantly comes on strongly to girls with crude sexual humor and often directs homosexual slurs to men who he dislikes, particularly Caesar. Rooney speaks the word faggot dozens of times in the movie, and with the current atmosphere of political correctness, it's very unlikely that would be the case if the movie were released now. In addition, Rooney's heavy use of that word is ironic, as one of his two main friends in the movie, Williams, is played by Stephen Jeffries, who later starred in several homosexual pornographic films. And that's also ironic, as Williams is extremely girl-crazy and sexually frustrated. With his unkempt hair, mischievous grin, and childlike excitement over anything related to girls, Williams is one of my favorite characters in the movie. He's primarily a sidekick, but he is the main focus of a fabulous scene. He assists in serving communion, and as traditional Irish music plays and gets progressively faster, he continually stares at girls' tongues over and over until he finally passes out as the music suddenly turns off. Rooney's other main friend is Corbett, played by Patrick Dempsey in his screen debut. Corbett is a largely undeveloped character who's mostly just shown hanging out with his friends. Shortly after Dunn is first bullied by Rooney, Dunn walks into Brother Constance's classroom and sees Rooney taking the screws out of Caesar's desk. Class begins a few seconds later, and Caesar is uncharacteristically late because of a restroom emergency. He sits down, and his desk almost immediately collapses. Brother Constance is initially furious at Caesar, but then notices that the screws of his desk are missing and demands to know who did it. Dunn quietly whispers to Caesar, "Sorry, man, I tried to warn you," which Brother Constance notices and asks Dunn to repeat to the class, which he does. Brother Constance then asks Dunn if he knows who took Caesar's screws. Dunn says no, but Brother Constance replies, "I think you know who took Caesar's screws and to who you would have to answer," at which point Caesar interrupts by saying, "It's to whom, brother?" As punishment for interrupting, Brother Constance makes Caesar crawl up and down the aisle while repeating, "To whom, brother? To whom, brother?" Meanwhile, Brother Constance slaps Dunn in the face and then paddles his open palms 9 times, but he still says nothing. Brother Constance then shoves Dunn toward the students, telling him to point out the culprit. Rooney smirks and raises his eyebrows at Dunn, who snaps and attacks Rooney. The fight is quickly broken up by Brother Constance as well as Brother Timothy, played by John Hurd, who's observing the class. Brother Timothy is very disturbed by his observations and goes to Brother Thadeus, expressing concern about Brother Constance's brutality and sadism. However, Brother Thadeus hails Brother Constance as a very effective teacher and recommends to Brother Timothy that he keep his thoughts to himself. Brother Thadeus goes on to tell Brother Timothy that everyone joins the order with their own ideas, but often find out that they have a lot to learn themselves and that authority must never be undermined by the display of dissension from the faculty. So we learned that individualism is discouraged not only among the students but also among the faculty. Unlike many of the teachers and administrators at St. Basil's who are very prim and proper, Brother Timothy is still a kid at heart. He socializes with the students and even acts a lot like them, but he's also serious when need be and sometimes gives the students good practical advice. One scene in particular does a great job establishing him as St. Basil's oldest teenager. About a third of the way through the movie, he walks into the neighborhood soda fountain, and because the brothers regularly go there to see if any of the St. Basil students are misbehaving, which turns out to be a bigger plot element than it seems at first, the patrons panic when Brother Timothy walks in. They become silent, hide their cigarettes, and nervously stare at him, but then he buys a pack of cigarettes and asks Rooney for a light. My stepson Joshua, who's now 19 years old, first saw the movie with me when he was 9, right after the American DVD came out. Shortly afterward, we were watching Home Alone, and I asked him if he recognized John Hurd, who plays the dad. Joshua described Hurd as the cool brother. Back to Heaven Help Us, the punishment that Dunn and Rooney receive for their fight is to kneel for a long period of time in Brother Thadeus's office while holding a heavy book with each hand. Brother Thadeus observes some of the punishment, but while he's away from his office, he has one of his assistants listen in to Dunn and Rooney through a secret intercom. While alone in Brother Thadeus's office, Rooney expresses pleasant surprise and great appreciation to Dunn for his refusal to implicate Rooney, despite receiving such harsh treatment from Brother Constance. Rooney offers to form a friendship with Dunn, but he feels very negatively toward Rooney and declines the offer. Shortly afterward, though, Rooney tells Dunn that if they don't become friends after their fight, Rooney will have to continue harassing Dunn to save face. Dunn then reluctantly forms a friendship with Rooney and begins hanging out with him, Williams, and Corbett. Rooney tells Dunn that as a result of their friendship, Dunn won't have to hang out with Caesar anymore and instead can hang out with, as Rooney puts it, the regular guys. But Rooney soon realizes that he has use for Caesar after all. Over the aforementioned secret intercom, Brother Thadeus's assistant heard Rooney refer to Brother Constance by a very bad phrase. In response, Brother Thadeus has given Rooney 2 choices. Either apologize to Brother Constance or be dismissed from the track and field team. Afraid of being severely beaten by Brother Constance, Rooney realizes that without track and field, in his own words, my grades will be based on my grades. He turns to Caesar for academic help, but Caesar declines. Shortly afterward, Corbett and Williams are preparing for confession, and Rooney modifies their lists of sins to make them sound much less bad. While waiting in line, the the abrasive Father Abruzzi, played by Wallace Shawn, becomes so angry with the young male confessor that Father Abruzzi jerks the boy out of the booth and takes him away for punishment. By the way, after 30 years, I still don't understand why Father Abruzzi got mad. Maybe I'm missing something, but as far as I can tell, the boy was being sincerely repentant. Anyway, while Father Abruzzi is away, Rooney notices Caesar walking into the confession booth. Rooney enters the other side pretending to be a priest. Caesar confesses failing to footnote some of his sources on his submission in a recent literary contest. In one of my favorite bits of dialogue in the film, their exchange goes like this. After Caesar gives a long explanation about failing to footnote the sources, an irritated Rooney says, "Get to the sin." Caesar responds, "Plagiarism, Father," as if plagiarism is one of the 7 deadly sins. And Caesar adds that if it's discovered, it could keep him out of Harvard. Rooney is confused, having no idea what plagiarism is, and he asks, "Alone or with someone else?" "With a girl?" In the end, Rooney orders Caesar to say 1 Our Father, 1 Hail Mary, and to help Rooney get passing grades, or, quote, "You can kiss off Harvard, pal." So Caesar ends up joining Rooney's clique, and the two grudgingly tolerate each other for the rest of the movie. As alluded to earlier, many St. Basil students regularly hang out at the soda fountain, which is run by a crusty but feminine high school-aged girl named Danni, played by Mary Stuart Masterson. Danni is very jaded and often makes sarcastic and mean-spirited remarks to the many male customers who make crude advances at her. She initially dislikes Dunn because of his association with Rooney and company, but she soon realizes that he's not like them, and the two begin a romantic relationship. Even amid the hilarity of much of the movie, the Dunn-Danni romance is very well developed and beautifully portrayed. Most of my favorite on-scene romances, including this one, are those that forget about glamour and simply go for realism. I know from experiences that new romances, especially those involving young people, are often very awkward at first. As the two build their relationship, Danni reveals that while her now divorced parents were married, her father's mistress committed suicide because she couldn't have him. Her father now suffers from major depressive disorder, or melancholia, as it's referred to in this movie, leaving her to run the soda fountain while her father is in an almost vegetative condition. So here we see two kids on the brink of adulthood who both experienced great tragedy, who both live in very stifling environments, and are finding warmth, comfort, and acceptance in each other. And while I won't give any specifics about the way their romance ends, as it's crucial to the movie's climax, I will say that like many romances involving young people, this one ends because of outside factors, thus adding to the realism. While Dunn and Danni are the only steady romantic couple among the young people of this movie, Rooney and Corbett are both interested in a girl named Janine, played by Dana Barron, who attends a nearby all-girls Catholic high school. In one of the funniest scenes of the movie, after a St. Basil's dance, Rooney and Janine go out driving with Caesar and Janine's friend Kathleen, played by Yeardley Smith, later the voice of Lisa Simpson, in her movie debut. And speaking of The Simpsons, Nancy Cartwright, later the voice of Bart Simpson, has an uncredited role in this film. On IMDb, she's listed as Girl at Dance, though I haven't actually spotted her in the film. Although there are dozens, if not hundreds, of people in the dance, so it would be easy to miss her. I don't know if their association from that film had anything to do with them ending up together on The Simpsons, but I think it's a good possibility. But anyway, Rooney makes the appropriately inept decision to park his father's car on a drawbridge. He and Janine take a walk, while Caesar and Janine sit in the back seat of the car and get to know each other. While Caesar and Kathleen sit in the back seat of the car and get to know each other. It turns out that Kathleen is very attracted to Caesar because of his intellect, and the dialogue between the two is fabulous, especially this exchange. Kathleen says, "I especially liked the way you detailed the split between Freud and Jung," to which Caesar responds, "I did do that rather well, didn't I?" But unfortunately, Caesar's first experience with romance, as well as Rooney's father's car, are both doomed because of a passing barge, and the scene is further enhanced by a surprising cameo from Calvert DeForest as the bridge operator. He's best remembered as Larry Bud Melman from David Letterman shows. And now for the last scenes I'll address explicitly. About two-thirds of the way through the movie, the entire St. Basil student body and faculty attend the aforementioned parade that includes Pope Paul VI. Not surprisingly, Rooney and company aren't as interested in seeing the Pope as are many in the St. Basil's entourage, so they sneak away to a movie theater and see Blue Hawaii starring Elvis Presley. As punishment, they're required by Brother Constance to clean the statue of St. Basil every Sunday until Easter. And that's a particularly unappealing job, as the statue is severely infested with bird feces. And that plot element also contributes significantly to the climax. I also want to share two other favorite moments of mine from the movie, but without fully explaining them, as they're both crucial to the climax. One of my favorite lines is Caesar saying, "Please, brother, can't we work out another punitive plan?" And I also love Dunn's reaction when he opens a duffel bag as he and the rest of that clique are sitting in the auditorium. He's grieving from Danni at the time, but still gets a kick out of seeing what's inside the duffel bag, even though it doesn't completely make him forget about his grief. I appreciate it so much because it's the only portrayal I've ever seen in film of such mixed emotions. It reminds me of a time when I was grieving over a woman back in 1998 while watching an NBA playoff game between my Indiana Pacers and the Michael Jordan-led Chicago Bulls, and going sort of crazy when Reggie Miller hit a game-winning three-point shot, but not as crazy as I would have gone had everything been going right in my life. One thing that's interesting about watching a movie over a span of 30 years is observing how you perceive the movie at different times in your life. I loved the movie for my first viewing 30 years ago, but I was only 14 then, and I'm 44 now, so I can relate to the movie a lot better, particularly having now experienced serious romance and having been on the other side of adult-child relations, as well as seeing my youth from a much greater perspective than I saw it at the time. Sometimes I enjoy movies less as I age, as I now recognize that they aren't as entertaining or realistic as they seemed at the time. But Heaven Help Us is a movie that I continually love more and more the older I get, which to me is one of the biggest signs of a movie's greatness. One of the most striking things in the movie is that the casting department did an extraordinary job in finding so many diamonds in the rough. This was, as I said, Patrick Dempsey's first movie. In addition, it was Andrew McCarthy's second, Kevin Dillon's second, and Mary Stuart Masterson's third, and all went on to have very prolific careers and at least moderate levels of stardom, and very big stardom in the case of Patrick Dempsey, who on a local note is heavily involved with the IndyCar series. He co-owns Vision Racing and also drove the pace car at the 2007 Indianapolis 500. It was also only Jay Patterson's second movie, and while he's never become very famous, he's remained active and currently has 63 IMDb credits. I've only seen him in one other role, and ironically it was as a good guy. That was in 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I was also pleasantly surprised to learn on IMDb that he's from my region. He's a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, which is just 74 miles from my hometown of Madison, Indiana. And while there are a lot of people in this movie who deserve a game ball, to use American sports terminology, to me, Jay Patterson is very close to the top of the list. He made Brother Constance one of my all-time favorite love-to-hate characters. There's nothing whatsoever to like about him. He's such a jerk and loves to abuse the students so much that most viewers probably spend almost an hour and a half waiting for him to get a dose of his own medicine. I once read a quote from Sylvester Stallone in which he spoke of the importance of giving an audience emotional payback. An example of that comes in the last Rambo movie, simply titled Rambo, from 2008. At the climax, after wiping out dozens if not hundreds of bad guys with a machine gun, the title character conveniently runs out of bullets, paving the way for him to kill the main bad guy in a much more sensational and gruesome way. Well, nobody gets killed in this movie, but we do get an extreme dose of emotional payback in regard to Brother Constance. While I won't ruin the ending for you, I will say that when he finally gets what's coming to him, it's set up with absolute brilliance, maximizing the impact of the scene by presenting an atmosphere that encourages you to stand up and cheer, as the movie expects that you want to. I also want to address a point of controversy involving the movie. Some people seem to think that this film negatively portrays religion in general and Catholicism in particular. In fact, conservative movie critic Michael Medved, who's a religious Jew, includes a clip of this movie in a documentary that he made about the negative way that religion is portrayed by Hollywood. The clip is a hellfire-type speech about lust that Father Abruzzi gives to the St. Basil students and their dates at the start of a school dance. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and I was raised a United Methodist, which these days is only one small step above atheism, but I'm strongly against trashing other people's religions or denominations, and I don't think this film does. I read that screenwriter Charles Purpura wrote the movie as a semi-autobiographical account of his experience attending a Catholic high school. Furthermore, I have a friend who's a huge fan of this movie who attended Catholic schools in the 60s and 70s and is still a practicing Catholic, and he doesn't find the movie to be anti-Catholic. In fact, he confirmed that a lot of the portrayal of discipline in this movie is accurate, and that he's glad the clergy are so varied. There are several good ones, and the only two very bad ones are Brother Constance and Father Abruzzi. In fact, Brother Thadeus, despite the way he portrays himself early on, is seen as one of the good guys by the end of the movie. And the IMDb message boards on this movie from those who identify themselves as former Catholic school students generally describe the movie as being accurate, other than a few comic exaggerations. And while the movie remains relatively obscure, it does seem to have a small cult following, especially among former Catholic school students. About 8 years ago, before Facebook relegated MySpace into obscurity, I was browsing through a MySpace group called the Johnny Lawrence Appreciation Society, Johnny Lawrence being the main rival of Ralph Macchio's title character in The Karate Kid. One of the members of the group was listed as Caesar, and his profile picture was Caesar from Heaven Help Us with gum stuck to his nose. Seeing that caught me off guard so much, it was one of the biggest laughs I've ever had. I emailed him, including some of my favorite quotes from the movie, and he emailed me back telling me that I seemed to have an intellectual sense of humor, which I took as a compliment. Back to screenwriter Charles Purpura, he's very much a mystery. He only has 3 credits on IMDb, all in screenwriting. Heaven Help Us is his first, and it's followed later that year by an episode of CBS School Break special titled The Day the Senior Class Got Married. And finally, in 1988, theatrical movie titled Satisfaction, a comedy about a female rock music group. And amazingly, after all the future stars who are in Heaven Help Us, that tradition was continued in Satisfaction with the movie debuts of both Julia Roberts and Justine Bateman. The movie also includes Liam Neeson and Deborah Harry, the lead vocalist of the rock music group Blondie. I'll make a point to see that movie as well as the CBS School Break special episode, as Heaven Help Us is fantastically written. Sadly, Charles Purpura died on March 20th, 2005 at the age of 59. There's no trivia for him on IMDb, so I have no idea what he did in his life other than those 3 screenplays. If you can enlighten me on this matter, please do. As I said, the movie grossed only $6 million. Heaven Help Us grossed only $6 million at the American box office. I don't know what the budget was, but I'd guess around $5 million. I also don't know how much the film grossed internationally. I do know that a big chunk of the budget must have gone to music. The movie prominently features about 10 Motown classics from the period in which the movie takes place, which further cements the 60s feel, as well as a few early rock and roll classics. Fortunately, Heaven Help Us is pretty easy to get a copy of. It was, as I said, released on VHS in 1985 and then on DVD in America in 2005. You can probably find a copy online for just a few dollars, and it's sold in some stores as well. Unfortunately, the DVD here does not contain any bonus materials, not even a theatrical trailer or TV spots. The movie was previously released in Australia on DVD under the title Catholic Boys, and as far as I know, Australia is the only country in which the movie was released under that alternate title. So in conclusion, Heaven Help Us is not only probably my all-time favorite comedy drama, it's one of my favorite movies, period, maybe in my all-time top 10, certainly in my all-time top 20 or 25. Other than a few anachronisms such as the school buses, this is nearly a flawless movie, which is a particularly phenomenal achievement because of the diverse elements that were combined here. We have the side-splitting humor, in-your-face depictions of hardcore discipline, a very good love story, frank portrayals of loss, grieving, and depression, and somehow, as I said, it all fits together seamlessly. Never once does the movie feel disjointed. If you have a particular aversion to hearing either of the F words, the main one, as well as the homosexual slur, be forewarned that this movie does contain a strong dose of both of them. But if you can endure that, you'll be treated to something extra special. This is an awesome movie that will take you all over the emotional spectrum. It's been with me for 30 years now, and while I don't drink alcohol, I liken the movie to an expensive bottle of wine that keeps getting better with age. It currently has a rating of 6.9 on IMDb, and while that's pretty good, it's still way too low for this movie. Heaven Help Us is one of those rare movies that I give 10 out of 10. Well, this concludes episode 2. Feel free to share this video, to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook, and to share any thoughts that you have by posting comments or by emailing me through my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Lec Zorn. That's facebook.com/LECZORN. Thanks so much for joining me, and I cordially invite you to do so again in the near future for episode 3. For Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn. Good night.